Let me know when to go.
You're good.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. Thanks for joining AE Works and Citra Consulting today. My name is Mike Cherok. I'm the president and CEO of AE Works, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. As an entrepreneur, today's topic, creating your competitive advantage, is especially interesting to me and one that I believe is very important, especially in a time of crisis. Today, we'll be helping leaders and managers of organizations identify the skills and strategies that will be needed in the future and how to create your competitive advantage. To give you a sense of the crisis impact on our world, in attendance today, we have people from throughout the U.S. Our attendees represent every industry from hospitality to manufacturing to government agencies. This crisis indeed impacts us all. Before I introduce you to our speakers, I want to give you a quick overview of the format of our webinar. In your window, you will see a poll tab. We have a current poll to get us started about your business continuity plans. This is anonymous, and we'd appreciate you responding. We'll queue up more polls throughout the presentation to have you participate and share your situation with your fellow attendees. To the left of polls, you will see a Q&A. We will be addressing questions at the end, but please add your questions as you think of them. The webinar will be recorded and will be emailed to everyone today. And if you know people who are unable to register, it will be available on our website. Finally, bandwidth is being challenged for everyone given the virtual nature we have all gone to. So we apologize in advance for any audio or video issues that we may encounter. We will work through them. Now I would like to introduce you to our two speakers. Carly, if you go to slide 2, please. Thank you. Our first speaker is Herb Brichta, our workplace safety expert. Herb has experience in the military, healthcare sector, and private industry in leadership roles with specific responsibilities for preparing organizations to face evolving emergency situations like what we are all currently dealing with. Herb was actively involved in planning for security, anti-terrorism, continuity of operations, and responding to a pandemic influenza while in the military. Herb leads the security risk management practice at AE Works. For current clients of AE Works, Herb has inspected workplaces across the country for safety, security, and continuity of operations, which have helped employers prepare for moments like this. He will be discussing what is needed for a comprehensive business continuity plan and key skills and strategies to maintain safety and security in the workplace. Our second speaker is Richard Citron, an organizational psychologist and resiliency strategist. Richard's work helps companies transform how their leaders manage the organization. Over the past 25 years, Richard has helped global companies and small businesses recognize that by focusing on their greatest strengths and assets, they can drive their business success. Richard will be sharing ideas today based on his book, The Resilience Advantage, which helps leaders manage the range of emotions and concerns we all experience during a crisis. He will provide helpful advice on implementing communications that will help you drive results, and he will identify new opportunities to strengthen relationships with your employees, customers, and business colleagues. Richard will help us on how to assess where our businesses are now and walk us through how to apply key resiliency behaviors and strategies to create our competitive advantage. So now I'll turn the mic over to Richard to get us started.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks to AE for sponsoring this workshop. I do want to mention to start off with that today is Giving Tuesday, which is a day that actually all around the country as well as around the world is an opportunity for all of us to make donations to nonprofit organizations that are serving so many of those people who are in need. So I think if you go to givingtuesday.com or .org, just Google Giving Tuesday, you'll find a link to your local community where you're able to make a donation to your favorite nonprofit. And many of these are being matched by community foundations or different philanthropies. So just want to put that in there because I think one of the things that we've all recognized through this pandemic, and perhaps one of the silver linings, is how important it is and how much satisfaction we get from helping others and supporting others, and certainly we know from our own businesses as well as what we're seeing in our communities, the great need for help. So check out Giving Tuesday, and if you have the opportunity, drop off some cash to those favorite nonprofits of yours. So with that, thanks for letting me make that pitch. Want to talk about what we're going to be covering today. 3 areas. First, we're going to look a little bit at phases and where is your business right now in relationship to the progression of this virus. The second piece, just go back a little bit, Carly, there. Second objective that we have is to talk about the skills and strategies that we're going to need to get into this next phase, which is going to be related to return to work. And then the third aspect we want to cover is creating your competitive advantage. What are the things you'll know to kind of leapfrog out of this situation and maybe even reach escape velocity moving forward? So we talk about phases, and we've had a number of discussions, Herb and Mike and I, about the phases, and I think we've identified 3 key phases that we want to address today. The first phase is the one we've been in and hopefully we're coming out of. It's around establishing safety and security. It's around maintaining operational functionality. It's reactionary in its nature. But what we've seen is that people have been somewhat successful in doing this. Staff have responded. We've had the technology to address it, and we've created a safe and secure environment for people's health and well-being, as well as hopefully maintaining your work focus. The second phase we want to be talking about is this next phase, which we think of as stability. It's kind of laying the groundwork for competitive advantage. It's looking at what we're capable of doing right now, given the constraints of returning to work. What are the investments we need to make in terms of cleaning, PPE, addressing people and customer concerns, moving from a degraded environment, which is what we've been in, where we haven't been able to work together, to a more stabilized environment. And how do you move through that and help people to move through it? How do we make decisions and respond to that? And finally, the third phase we want to talk about is finding your competitive advantage, really looking for the opportunities that might be out there for your business to grow. So, so the first question we want to ask is, where is your business now? And, the focus has so far been on, as I said, creating safety and security and new work routines. That's basically worked well. We've been doing a number of resilience assessments, both by interview and survey. And what we have found is that employees are doing pretty well. They're into their new routines. They've been able to use the technological capabilities that we have. And, I think about what it would have been like 10 years ago if we didn't have, if this kind of crisis had happened during our last fiscal crisis. We certainly did not have the technical capabilities that we have today. So systems have been accommodative to what we've done, and that's been fortunate for us. And I think in many ways we need to kind of acknowledge our success and recognize that we've really done well, and we have to continue to kind of make an assessment of where our business is and where the opportunities are for us to grow from here. So when we think about what some of those metrics might be, we begin to think a little bit about driving forces or different strategic opportunities that we might have as a way of examining what our competitive strengths are going into the crisis. And we're going to look at those as competitive opportunities going out of the crises. So you can look through these. I think most of these you'll be familiar with. Obviously, if you've had a strong strategy and your strategy holds, a lot of organizations we've been talking to, they have to shift their strategies, that even though they have a core strategy, they've had to make modifications. For one organization that I've worked with that does respiratory systems, they've had to refocus on just building ventilators. Even though they have other products that they wanted to bring out, their focus has primarily been now about building ventilators, which they've needed to do. So they're keeping the core strategy, but they're making changes along the way. Are your people practices strong? What's the grit and agility that you have in your organization? How is that built into the fabric of the organization? If your operational methodology is strong, that certainly can make a difference in how you're functioning and surviving. I think a simple thing to do is to take a matrix with these 10 different competitive advantages and rate yourself along with your leadership team on whether you're strong, whether you're okay, or whether you're weak, with examples. So I think people will say, our people practices are really strong. And when you start to look at the examples of what you want to do to demonstrate those, you want to make sure that you can mock those up and you can say, yes, here are specific examples of where our people practices are strong, or we've been able to stay connected to our customer base, or our customers have even been supportive of us in moving forward and helping us to maintain our business flow. So when we, so a couple of examples I'd like to use for this to look at how this has worked. So one leader I've been working with who heads a global manufacturing company shared with me that when he's in the center of a storm, it's very calming for him. It's actually the best place he likes to be. While he's concerned for the well-being of his employees, he found that the challenges associated with the crisis were invigorating for him and his capabilities. He had to negotiate some health and safety issues with his union, ensure that his supply chain kept up with current business demands, and educating his board and investors about his continuity plan. He demonstrated his competitive advantage by looking at values, how he cared about his team, and his comfort and confidence with his strategy and his operational excellence. The second CEO that I want to talk about heads a nonprofit organization, and her approach is a bit different, but nonetheless effective. She felt a great sense of urgency in going beyond the expectations of her members and became somewhat actually impatient with her team in coming up with innovative ways to serve them. She had been putting in long days establishing clear work plans for her various teams, which have resulted in her organization providing valuable information to her clients on a regular basis, including daily podcast updates, facilitation with the PPP program, and engaging legislators with whom they could advocate for their issues. Unlike CEO number one, who's comfortable being in the storm, the center of the storm, CEO two is actually creating the storm, and her team is responding to her expectations. So she's using her competitive advantages of brand, reputation, intellectual property to drive her work and her teams. So, as you begin to think about your competitive advantage and how your team has functioned, an example, for example, is to look at some metrics around your team, around your people. How have they responded to this crisis? Have they lost, gained, or stayed the same in terms of productivity? A number of the companies we've done this resilience assessment with, people have maintained or even improved productivity. However, they're less efficient. So they're winding up putting 10 hours in during a day or 12 hours in during a day, working into the evening. They don't have boundaries as well. How well has your leadership team responded? Are they reacting to the kinds of things that you as a leader may be saying, or reacting to what other people are saying? Or are they holding fast to what the plan is? This is a great opportunity, and we'll talk about this a little later, to assess the effectiveness of your team and how they've responded to all this. And finally, perhaps in relationship to this phase two, what are you hearing from your people about return to work? Again, in the assessments that we've been doing, we've heard maybe 50-50. Some people are ready and anxious to get back to work. Other people are a little more cautious, maybe want to look at staggering work times, or perhaps alternating days, concerns about public transportation, how people are getting to work. You want to be engaging your people, hearing from them what their concerns are, so that you and they know exactly what the issues are and how you can be able to address this in the second phase, as well as moving forward to competitive advantages and opportunities. So with that, let me turn it over to Herb, who's going to talk a little bit examples for crisis management and some other crisis issues going forward. Herb?
Thanks, Richard. So continuing with this metric discussion, and these are a simple series of yes/no evaluations, but I'd like to start with, look at, did you have an emergency plan or a business continuity plan? If so, you likely relied on some of the components of these plans to transition to your current operating model. And I say parts of these because this situation really doesn't fully apply in either of those contexts, but that's what we had to go on. And you should evaluate what worked and what didn't, and overall assess the quality of your contingency planning. And that's a metric you can use both looking backwards and looking forwards to the next challenging event. Remember, hurricane season's coming up, and nature really doesn't care that there's already a crisis going on. So that risk of a compounding event continues to remain. If you saw in the news today, there was a landslide in New York State. So these other things, they still exist to affect the survival of your business, and you should really continually update that cyclical planning to make sure that you're prepared to continue to survive. Another thing to really evaluate is whether your IT assets are still working for you in this new environment. Again, it's a simple yes/no metric, but it also can be tied into those questions that Richard asked on the previous slide. If productivity's gone down, as you continue to analyze the why with that, how much of it is due to IT difficulties at the root cause level? So there's some very real things you have to look at in terms of IT assets, and we'll get into that some more later. And finally, this is one you really don't want to have to retroactively evaluate, but your IT security measures. Do you have them, and are they sufficient? We'll get into security a little more later, but those are all things that you wanted to have in place, and they're definitely important as we move through these phases of ultimately springing forward here. Could we go to the next slide, please? So in that first phase, we talked about a number of things, but we're establishing the safety and security of not only our staff medically, which we've received a significant amount of assistance from the government with, but also the safety and security of your business. The thing to know about this phase is, as Richard alluded to, it's very reactionary. At the start, the state said certain businesses are going to close, certain businesses have to close, certain ones can change, and certain ones can remain open. And depending on your individual situation, you reacted to that and you adjusted, right? These are very survival reactions. Then the federal government offers some aid packages. You reallocated effort into applying for those or obtaining those. And again, that's a reactive measure to ensure the survival of your business. And on top of that, you have the normal reactions you always encounter, which, customer demands, staff issues, things of that nature. And the thing about reaction is that it's inherently not stable. Reactive operations are very hard on leaders from the owner of the company all the way down to the frontline managers. And if your leaders aren't good, that stress is eventually going to propagate down to your staff. So you really want to get into a position organizationally where you're able to assert some level of control and provide stability. And that's what this next phase is about. Next slide, please. And the first thing I'd like you to realize is that you're likely in a somewhat stable environment already. So an easy thing to do is finish that mental transition with your unit, with your company, with your organization, by acknowledging it and letting your staff know. Just some simple messaging examples. This is the status quo, and it'll be maintained for a number of months, or the office is closed for the foreseeable future, or even down to the very tactical. Stop working from your coffee table. We're going to be in this for at least a couple of more months. Just taking away that piece of uncertainty can help with the stability of your staff and their immediate future plans. And then we'll get go back, please. Sorry about that. And then what you also want to do in that second bullet there is you want to exercise some control over how all of this information that we're getting from the state, from the federal government, from various resources, webinars like this, understand and begin to control how that's affecting your staff. And you can do that by controlling when and how people are actually going to return to the office. So when the state and locality say you're allowed to open back up, you're not going to be reactionary and just show back up to work. It's going to be a planned and managed event that I'll discuss in the following slides. If we can go to the next one, please. And to that first point, these are some stability measures that if you haven't achieved them yet, you should be working towards, because remote work isn't going away for the foreseeable future. And that remote work comes with challenges that in your office environment, you've likely already solved. Those ergonomically correct chairs and desks that you've invested in, they may not be what your employees are using at home. And everybody's home and situations are different. And some people are going to have a full-blown home office, and others will be working from kitchen tables or whatever their situation allows. And your concern here is lost time due to those ergonomic and repetitive stress injuries. Simple things like poor posture and poor lighting, they can trigger migraines, among other things, which will take a staff member down for a day. And then you start to look at longer term injuries like carpal tunnel syndrome and even herniated discs. They can result from a poorly set up working area, and the lost time for those types of injuries is measured in weeks, not days. So that's not a survival strategy to be dealing with those types of injuries. You want to be proactive and really push this type of ergonomic training and get this information out to your folks. Not as a plug, but we do have some recorded content on our website that deals with ergonomics in the home office, and that's available for free. And there's also a number of resources from both OSHA and other organizations that can help you with this. So the tools are there, and please make them available to your staff and remind them that the home office is part of the business. The other thing to remember with remote work is now that our homes have become a workplace, we have some privacy issues. When are you at home and when are you actually at work now? And you can provide some stability with that to your staff by doing something like setting core hours. Having an end of the day meeting at the team level is another great one. And what you're doing with that is you're simulating the act of going home. So just like in the office, the day's winding down, you stop by a colleague's desk to ask a question, and you see they've left for the day. There's a natural decision there where you ask, is this important enough to call them at home, or can it wait till tomorrow? That checkout meeting at the end of the day can artificially create that decision point where your colleagues are asking, is it important enough to call after checkout, or can it wait till tomorrow? And then having that break in the day when the home becomes a home again and not a workplace can serve to lower your staff's stress level. And then more into the technical stuff, you have privacy considerations in the home, especially if you're allowing staff to use personal computers for work, which I really don't recommend. In the home, that computer's potentially a shared resource, and you have, as the business owner, no control over that machine. You don't know what viruses are on there. You don't know what the condition of that home network is. So for those that handle, especially your sensitive information like HR data, payroll, sensitive client information, account numbers, you really want to set policy for what devices your staff can use to work on specific things. And if you haven't been monitoring this and you've just been proceeding under the strategy of hope that it won't impact you, you're just getting lucky. And I strongly invest that you invest in these segregated devices, a business device, and provide that to your staff if your situation allows. And of course, do your virus scans, have your staff periodically reboot their home routers, and make sure operating systems are up to date. And then last on security, there's also this issue of sensitive paperwork. People still work from printouts even at home. And in the event, I hate to say it, but of a residential break-in, you don't want printouts of your staff's social security numbers and private data or blank checks and your business financials being a part of a residential robbery. A couple $100 for a home safe is really a small investment you can make in the stability of your business here. And even if that's not achievable, you should at least be tracking what information is stored in residences. So in the event that there's a compromise, you can at least begin to control the damage that's been done. We've really rounded out the stability phase. And what you're looking for here, just to reiterate, is to make that organizational shift into accepting that this distributed work environment with many more people working virtually is here to stay for the time being. You've adapted operations to reflect that, and you're making investments to ensure that this environment is sustainable for at least a period of months. And if we can move into the next slide, please. And then why does this need to be sustainable when we're hearing about things opening back up? Well, you've got a lot of things you have to get in place before you can return to the office. So as I mentioned, it's not going to be all hands on deck as soon as the state says we can open. First and foremost, your building systems. Again, I've talked about this in other webinars, so I won't belabor the point. But your building systems need to be cleaned and checked, not for COVID-19, but Legionella. And this is in your HVAC system, your ventilation system, and your plumbing. These systems are going to need to be flushed, possibly disinfected, and run for a number of days if your landlord hasn't been doing it. And, back into an OSHA context, it's on you as the employer to make sure that these things get done. It's on you as the employer to make sure that the workplace is safe. It's not on the landlord. So you don't want to be dealing with staff getting Legionella infections. And that there's a recording with much more detail on that on our website. And I'm available, our company's available, and again, there's tons of information on Legionella available through the CDC and OSHA, in fact. But again, that takes time to manage all of that and to ensure it's been done to satisfaction. And you may even want to invest in testing just to really do your due diligence. Shifting a little bit, your operations do have to change based on the physical space that you have and whatever the distance requirements end up being. You might be implementing split shifts, A and B days, and your client and vendor visitation procedures are examples of things that need to change. So operations aren't going to be the same as when you left the office, and you'll need these policies and procedures to be in place and understood before you go back. And the requirements driving those are going to continue to evolve pretty much up until the day you actually walk back into that office. Cleaning procedures are a specific type of operational impact that's going to change. Service contracts will have to be adjusted. On the individual level, you'll have to have a sufficient stock of cleaning supplies, which may become just as important as having electricity for a little while. And all of that stuff takes time to set up. Alterations to your physical space might also be needed, and this is a little more of an investment, but minimally you're looking at signage requirements, and then the rest depends on your business situation and the layout of your space. Plexiglass hockey barriers that you're seeing in stores might end up being needed between your workstations because that's all you can do. Certainly reconfiguration of entrances and exits is a good idea to keep people from running into each other inadvertently. And access control procedures, those are going to change. Who can come into the office and when are things you'll want to think about. And certainly the visitor procedures are going to change. And for both visitors and your staff, there's physical screening that needs to take place, which we're actually already seeing in a number of buildings. And in order to achieve that screening, number one, you're going to have limited people that can do it, which means that you have to be strategic in where you can place those people because they can only cover a number of entries. And ultimately that's going to drive number two, which, certain doors that may have been entry and exit only might have to be reconfigured to be exit only. And then there's larger retrofits that you're going to be considering down the line, modifications to your ventilation system that we've discussed, reevaluating the density of people in your office and consequently your furniture layout or other things that are very real considerations in the near term. I'd like to point out a Gartner survey, which I just looked at, and they surveyed over 300 CFOs, and 3/4 of them are planning to reduce the number of people they have coming into the office on a daily basis. And that's not a statistically insignificant number. So that's something to consider. If all of these folks are doing that, it's worth looking at in your own personal circumstance. And there's the added benefit that you might be able to reduce operating costs by reducing that office footprint. And can we move into the next slide? So we talked about achieving stability from this chaos. And as I said, it's as much of a mental shift as it is anything else. But you need that phase one survival, and then you build on that to achieve your stability. And then you build on that stability to achieve competitive advantage, which I'll turn it back over to Richard to explain.
Thanks, Herb. That's great. I think it's interesting hearing your comments about kind of the return to work issues and strategies that come up. And I have to be honest, it certainly sounds overwhelming when you think about all the things that have to be done. But it probably isn't much more overwhelming than what we saw in phase one. Perhaps even less so because we're having a little more time to prepare for phase two. So I think one of the evidences that I talk about in relationship to our resilience is how we've done in previous kinds of situations. And while it still is an unknown about all of these issues that have to be undertaken, the truth is that resilience is kind of hardwired into us. And so our ability to respond to situations, to bounce back, or as Herb mentioned, even to bounce forward, is kind of built into us. So we want to recognize that we have these capabilities and capacities. And while they're hard, they require a great deal of effort, both physical and mental. They're very doable. And so we want to build on those and look at what some of those qualities are that we can be addressing and skills that we can be developing. So next slide, please. So, a couple of things to think about here in terms of, what you've learned about yourself and your organization so far. So there certainly has been a great deal of uncertainty that's been demonstrated for all of us. And as I mentioned, this resilience core component of how we respond to situations has been, I think, a measure of our success. And one of the major factors related to resilience and this capability is around gaining a sense of control. So what have we been able to manage or even master? And what has your team been able to manage and master? And that's a very important aspect to begin thinking about as we begin to look at phase two. Perhaps at home it was merely the case of you were able to get your office set up in some place where you had some measure of privacy and you had some comfortable seating. That's no small factor. And I think knowing what we know for phase two and the kinds of things that Herb identified and has identified over several seminars where he has spoke, kind of lays out a roadmap of how we can gain that sense of control and mastery. And the control is an important piece. And what comes along with control that's so important is around self-care. So things like sleep, eating well, you're getting some exercise, even beginning to expand your exercise. If you've just been, doing some walking or running, start to add some, some stretching to it, or some yoga, or some weightlifting. Just get those cans of those big 2-pound cans of tomatoes out of your pantry and do some arm lifts or some other weight work with it. Getting that kind of self-care is really important, and to think about what the self-care is for your business. And Herb talked about that a little bit when he talked about the check-in and check-out meetings. One of my clients has an 11:30 drop-in meeting every day where people can just drop in for 30 minutes, kind of a social check-in time. Gives people an opportunity to tell you what's going on, to share their concerns, to have that kind of water cooler or cup of coffee break that is really important. I think also that, and I talk about this slide as survival of the fittest and, one of the things we're recognizing, and I hear this from people all the time, is what's the new normal going to be? And I think the danger with the new normal is it takes us out of where we are presently. It takes us out of keeping our eye on the ball that's right in front of us right now. It's this notion of kind of being in the moment. I think sometimes we get a little bit ahead of ourselves, and there's a lot of distractions going on right now. And while I'll talk in a minute about the importance for leaders to be thinking strategically and thinking into the future, I've been urging people not to get too far ahead of ourselves and think about what the future is going to be like 2 years from now. Even if we go back to January when things were somewhat normal, and if I were to ask you, what was going on January 13th, 2019, a year ago, A, you wouldn't remember what it was, and B, it wasn't that urgent because things changed dramatically over a year. Forget about the coronavirus. So to stay focused on what's happening today is very important, and not getting too concerned about what the future in this new normal is going to look like. All right, next slide, please, Carly. So it's survival of the fittest and survival of the nimble and adaptable. So that is going to be, I think, a call out for all of us in terms of our ability to really thrive, survive in this second phase, grow in this second phase, and really thrive moving into the third phase. And, I'm a psychologist, so I like to focus a lot on behaviors and competencies, because I think that's how we learn when we exhibit the actions associated with these behaviors. And so terms like being nimble or being agile or being adaptable, people use, but we've never really defined what it means. So those behaviors are really descriptive here. I just want to walk through these quickly, which is to say that being nimble means that you learn quickly, you research, you identify what the key factors are. It also means that you're willing to experiment to see what works and what doesn't work, and to modify it accordingly, and that you see mistakes as a learning opportunity. You don't worry about or overly concerned about how things are working or didn't work. If they didn't work, what did you learn from it? Being adaptable, it means about being able to read the environment. You see cues, you take actions, not just in your immediate world, but also in the bigger world. The cues, the information was out there for me, for you about this coronavirus back in January. Very few of us really took action. We missed that cue. I missed that cue. It certainly would have made some differences for me. But we move on from there and we find the best actions to take in different situations, and we adapt our style to meet the needs of others. And the example that I would use is I have a great little restaurant, or kind of more of a coffee shop nearby where I live, called Curbside. And They had to close down, and they figured out about doing takeout almost as soon as they were permitted to start doing takeout. It took a couple of days for them to get it right, but then they sent out emails, posted on their Facebook page, and came up with some ideas around limiting hours, which they kind of created a sense of urgency for people and allowed them to have more prep time, as well as kind of reducing their payroll. So this ability to be nimble and agile is something that I see right in my neighborhood, but there's some other great examples that we've seen that we want to make sure we share. And Mike, are you available to talk a little bit about Veterans Breakfast Club? If you unmute, there you go.
I am. Yeah. Just take a quick moment here. So Veterans Breakfast Club is a nonprofit. I have the privilege of being on the board of directors of Veterans Breakfast Club. And the mission of Veteran Breakfast Club is to create communities of listening. And what we do is we tell the stories of veterans. And the entire structure of the organization or operation of the organization is based on live events. And a lot of the folks who attend tend to be older. So when you put that into the environment of the pandemic, it literally took Veterans Breakfast Club to a standstill. Not only could we not have live events, but also the people who attended were the most vulnerable. So we, under the leadership of our executive director, repositioned the organization to create VBC at home. Researched the technologies that were out there, like Zoom, Big Marker, like we're using here, or the format we ended up using is called Crowdcast, which allows us to do town halls. So similar. The response by our constituencies has been just unbelievable. In fact, we've allowed now veterans across the country to participate and tell their stories. And it's been quite a remarkable, very quick pivot that I think has put the organization on possibly some of the strongest footing it's had.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And you can begin to see that action, which came out of some necessity, also sets the stage for something that could be even greater than this. So we're kind of looking at those kinds of possibilities. A couple of other examples: Crooked Monkey, which is a company that does products, pivoted to sourcing N95 masks, as well as producing some civilian face masks that way add kind of a custom spin to our fight against coronavirus. And it's interesting. I do a little something called Resilient Minute on LinkedIn a couple of times a week, and I was wearing my mask yesterday because I want to kind of practice wearing a mask during the day. And then I realized that I have a whole collection of ties that I'm never going to be wearing ties anymore. So I'm thinking maybe I could somehow convert my ties into masks. And not only will I be, helping myself and others, but perhaps there'll be a fashion statement. So I think that one of the things we'll be seeing that'll be fun in the workplace is people's different masks and kind of the fashion statements that we'll be making about masks. So I think that's a way to bring up some engagement with employees. Third example here, fourth example is a Wiggle Whiskey, a local Pittsburgh company that's converted, I guess, some of their alcohol into hand sanitizers. So again, a new product line for them, and a good idea to look at these competitive opportunities. So let's move on to our last group of slides here, which really talk about this notion of competitive advantage. One of the quotes I love from Winston Churchill is "Never waste a good crisis." And I think while we can get into the dangers and scariness of a crisis, it also is a tremendous opportunity. I think most of you may be familiar with the Chinese term for crisis, which is a character that when translated or reverse engineered stands for dangerous opportunity. So there certainly is danger in the crisis, but also opportunity as well. So when we go to our next slide and we talk about our competitive advantages, we want to go back to what Herb and I were talking about earlier in terms of assessing what's worked, what hasn't worked, what structures you have in place around those 10 different competitive advantage ideas. You want to be thinking about those. But then there's 3 approaches that we want to suggest that you can take to help your organization advance. And the first strategy, which I know exists for a number of different people, we wish everybody would get past this, but we recognize that this is the case, is really survival as strategy, which is really around the fact of can you survive? Can your business survive? Will it survive? First and foremost, you want to be managing and assessing your fiduciary responsibilities. That means you should be maintaining contact with your bankers, the funding sources. You need to be doing what you have to do in terms of your cash flow, accounts receivable, anything in that area to make sure you're managing the finances of your business. Second, you want to be focusing on core specific business demands. What does your business require that you be doing? How well can you be doing it? Looking again at some of those strategic and competitive advantages. If it's an operational issue, if it's a customer issue, you want to be focused on those. Make sure your team is as clear as they can be. The example I used earlier, that membership association, and how that CEO has transformed her organization to really step up the game on behalf of the members and has done a really great job of it. I'm thinking about the another quote from Winston Churchill, which was that in a crisis, he said that you should pay attention to three things. One is you don't want to sugarcoat the reality of the situation. You want to demonstrate and discuss cautious optimism. But perhaps third and most important to me is he talked about the importance of engaging with meaning and purpose. And if you're in the survival or strategy mode, you want to be focusing with meaning and purpose for your organization so that everybody knows what you're about and not only your customers, but also your employees, as well as you. The second strategy that we want to suggest you can look at is service as strategy. And we're seeing this a lot from organizations right now. How do you serve your clients, employees, and other stakeholders well? These webcasts, these webinars that people are doing are all about serving clients. They're reaching out to them on a regular basis. How can we connect with our clients in a good way? And you want to be reaching out to them on a regular basis, every couple of weeks. And I'm telling people there's three things you can have in that conversation. The first question you can be asking your clients is, how are you doing? Just checking in to see how things are going. The second question is, what challenges are you having? Let me, talk to me about what the difficulties and challenges that you're having are about. Let's talk about them. And the third is, here's what I'm hearing from my best clients, and this is how they are handling things. So you're sharing information, you're sharing resources with people. There may be business in those conversations. Whether there is or not, you're in service to your customers right now until things get more stable, and these meaningful conversations will shape that. Same kind of approach with employees. Herb talked about that check-in and check-out meetings. I'm hearing from employees that they're working long hours and even having the checkout meetings are great, but then they're kind of going back to work. So we want to make sure that you're paying attention to your employees. You're connecting with them not only on a business need, but also on a personal need. Certainly as well as other stakeholders, whether they be community people or investors, you want to stay connected with those. Second thing you want to be looking at is these notion of time horizons and scenarios. I talked earlier about the importance of staying in the moment and not being concerned about the new normal. I think what I like about this alternative around time horizons and creating scenarios is that we can look at multiple options and how things play out. You want to be looking at things like the public health situation in the course of the disease. Some states are opening up, and there was an article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday. Let's check how things are in 14 or 17 days from now in those states to see whether things are stable. Hopefully, they will be, and we'll be able to move on. But nonetheless, you want to be looking at those scenarios. You want to be looking at the impact of government actions. You want to be talking about industry-specific themes. You want to be connected to your professional associations, see what they're saying, hear what your colleagues are putting out on webinars. And then finally, your business-specific capabilities. What is, what is it that your business needs to be doing? And you can be doing this by not only looking at early warning signs in terms of how employees are doing, but also in relationship to your KPIs, your key performance indicators. What's your dashboard looking like? Do you need to modify what your dashboard is so you have a crisis dashboard? And you can use that to then project some scenarios out further. Finally, this notion of engaging employees. Herb talked about several ideas that I thought were great in terms of the check-in, check-out, as we mentioned. Also reaching out as I mentioned about these resilience assessments we've been doing. How are your employees feeling about returning to work? What are the concerns they're hearing? Half of the folks in some businesses I've been talking to are ready to come back to work, want some safety within the workplace. Half, would like to explore working from home or alternate working schedules. They're concerned about public transportation. Check in with your folks, find out what they're needing, what their concerns are. Use your technology to create communities like team fitness activities, celebrating wins, and coaching people on work efficiency and not working 24/7. Keeping those communication patterns up, whether they're through Slack or other intranet strategies, as well as doing it obviously through Zoom and letting your people see you and know what's going on. Third strategy is around transformation as strategy. What's happening in your industry? What are the competitive advantages that you're seeing in your industry that can contribute to organizational success? How will all of this change your industry? And it's interesting. It's one of the questions I've asked people in these assessments. And some people kind of are taken aback from that and haven't really given it much thought. And then other people are saying, yeah, I think this is making a significant difference. And here's where it will be taking us as an industry. And this kind of gets us to this notion of thought leadership. And what is your unique thought leadership? What are the areas of interest that you have? What are the areas within your organization that you can be shaping not only your business, but your industry as well? In medicine, for example, the whole telemedicine piece, which I was talking to a physician friend of mine. He said, back in January, they did 5,000 telemedicine visits. And this last month, they did 150,000 telemedicine. So this will transform healthcare. Is there an opportunity for your business, for your industry, whether you're in healthcare or not, to address how telemedicine and other telecommuting strategies will be in place? Some of the engineering folks I've been talking about lighting and ventilation, certainly. Arts organizations, nonprofits, they're doing streaming productions at no cost, but maybe when they come out of this, they'll say, maybe we should be co-presenting Hamilton on a live stream to our to our annual subscribers. So how will you interact with your clients, your customers, hear what their expectations are and what they think will work, and they're going to give you a great deal of information about how you can begin thinking about being transformative. Finally, you've got to get into the public square. You've got to let people know what you're thinking and what your ideas are about. This could be a blog, certainly a blog on your website that you want to keep updated, doing on a regular basis, posting on LinkedIn, writing letters to the editor within your local newsletter, reaching out to professional associations and offering to set up a panel discussion with some of your colleagues about what people are seeing in the industry, maybe holding a meeting with your clients to discuss how they're doing and to bring some value to them about what you're seeing in the industry. My web guy brought together a dozen of his best customers last week, and we had a 60-minute meeting, and he shared some great ideas for us. We exchanged between us ideas around use of video and Zoom casting for our customers. So there's a lot of information. People want to be connected. Use this as a way to bring your information into the public square and think about what actions you can be taking on behalf of your business and your industry. So with that, I will thank you for your attention. I'll turn this back to Mike to see if we have some questions and his comments at this point.
Pretty sure that we had some technical. Obviously, we've lost Herb right near the end. Richard, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, I don't have any audio.
You can't hear anybody? Can you hear me?
Yeah, right near the end there, it started to go. I could see, Carly. It's going to issue 2 polls. There's a new poll that's opened. There was the one in the beginning of the webinar. And we're going to review those polls. So if you could answer the second poll, that would be great. And then I believe we have one more poll as well.
I think that one just popped up a little bit.
Those results. So I'll review the first poll results, which was how well has your business continuity plan guided your organization? And for the most part, I mean, it seems with some of the respondents that we've had, and again, apologize for some of the technical issues we're having right now. We lost Herb. But they seem to be very well or okay, kind of split evenly in terms of that. And I think as was noted earlier in the webinar that by Herb, that a lot of the kind of traditional business continuity plans that were in place did not have anticipated what happened during the pandemic, as well as the emergency planning as well. Like those two vehicles were not designed for 100% virtual work arrangements and everybody working out of their homes and not having access to things like we would normally would. So I think that response is pretty good. In terms of the second poll question, which of these competitive advantages do you think you can leverage to advance your business over the next 6 to 8 months? Strategy and people practices kind of dominating those results. And certainly that makes sense. The pandemic and what the response by government and by businesses was, life first, business second, in terms of order. And I think in terms of reopening, that's still the case, right? We want to get businesses back. A bad economy also is impactful to life in a negative way. But the order of the pandemic, the life first and business second remains. But certainly strategy and people practices addresses those most. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, which of the following matters most from those competitive advantages? It's interesting because, kind of technology, grit and agility matter most now. And I think that speaks to what you were talking about, which is much of the strategy in place right now is survival. And there's probably a blend of these different strategies. There's service as a strategy right now that's kind of blended with survival. And then, some are, it's almost like a race in a way from a competitive perspective, right? To get to transformation, because I think all businesses are going to have transformation as a strategy to not only to survive, but thrive and come out and be positioned for the long term.
Yeah. And I think one of the points, Mike, is that transformation is not something that necessarily is going to happen later. It's actually happening now. That's why the importance of not thinking too far ahead around the new normal, but thinking about what's happening today is where we have the opportunity for some kind of transformation as well.
So, Richard, I'm unfortunate. I'm unable to hear what you're saying. So I hope our audience can. We mentioned this issue with bandwidth, and it seems like every webinar at some point we have these issues. But we do want to get into some Q&A with the time we have left, which is just a couple minutes. So let me see what questions we have. If you have questions, please submit those questions. You can go in your webinar to the Q&A, submit those. They'll come to me, and then I'll be able to share them with Richard at the moment, and hopefully Herb at some point. So the first question we have, let's see here, it's for Richard. Richard, you spoke about people opportunity and leadership responding to the crisis. What are some suggestions you have for managers to recognize the emerging leaders?
Yeah, great question. I mentioned earlier that quote from Winston Churchill, or the of how you should deal with a crisis, which is don't sugarcoat, have cautious optimism, and engage with meaning and purpose. And I think one of the things that you want to be looking for managers and really all employees, because right now there's going to be tremendous opportunities for advancement in organizations, is that they engage with meaning and purpose. They're not just, they're doing their job, and they're also thinking. They're thinking beyond. I define. There's been a lot written about engagement, Mike, and I define engagement as the use of discretionary energy. So everybody does their work, but then how do you use your discretionary energy? And that's not necessarily, doing more. It may actually be doing less. It may be going for a walk during the day and thinking about what are the implications of all this for our business? What is it that we as a team can maybe do more efficiently? Are we working, are we addressing, are we connecting with our customers as much as possible? So managers to recognize these emerging leaders, I would say, people who are thinking. People who are thinking about the implications of this. People who are thinking of what's in the best interest of the business, how we can grow the business. I think if you're seeing that from emerging leaders or from other people on the team, those are the folks that you want to be drawing close, recognizing and giving them opportunities for advancement.
So, Richard, there's another question. That question is, organizations operate as a team. What are your thoughts on the function of herd immunity for psychological well-being and keeping teams engaged as we move through different phases?
Yeah, so I've been playing around with this notion of herd immunity, and we've talked about vaccine immunity or herd immunity. Herd immunity as a concept. Sweden is doing that, where they're just allowing people to get the illness, and then they'll be essentially immune from future illnesses. And I'm thinking about I'm playing around with the notion of psychological herd immunity. And I think there's some pluses and some minuses to it. But the idea, from my perspective, is that we all start to get on the same page around how we're approaching this issue. I think we saw that in the first phase, where there was widespread and successful adoption of Zoom as a technology, and everybody began to feel comfortable with that notion. The downside of it is we begin to get into a kind of groupthink around it, where everybody thinks this is the only way to be thinking. There's some danger to that as well. So we want to kind of support people in saying this is a strategy that works without letting it become dogma, so to speak. And I think employees are looking to their leaders to set the stage for that. I think in this next phase, again, where control is so important, we want to see leaders who are setting the standards, setting the expectations for what will happen, and then supporting the team to get into a place where we're all comfortable in this operational model. And we've developed the kind of term I'm using, herd immunity, for the notion that this model, whether it's staggered work shifts, one group comes in at 9, one group comes in at 2, or whether it's staggered days, or whether it's half the people work from home and half the people are at the office, we get some level of comfort with that, so that, again, we get a sense of control, and we build a kind of herd immunity around this. So I think it's a good way to do that, to kind of create that control and to begin thinking about we're wanting everybody on the same page. So I think it's an interesting idea to pursue. I'm going to continue to play around with it a little bit.
Okay. Richard, thanks for that. I can't hear you, but I'm trying to read lips. Well, let's go ahead and we'll go ahead and wrap up. So if we could move, Carly, if you could show the contact slide. So, thank you for joining us, and please feel free to contact us. Our information is shown on the slide, and we'll answer any questions you may have, or any concerns. We'd love to just get your thoughts on the webinar, what you think we can do to improve it. What you might like to see in future webinars. And I would like to mention that on Thursdays, AE Works hosts something we call our security break. It's very quick. Herb's your host. It's run a little bit between webinar kind of podcast format. We tackle different subjects for about 20 minutes or so. So it's fairly quick. It's just kind of the idea is a coffee break, but via webinar. And this Thursday, the topic is social distancing in the workplace. So we try to find very relevant topics that are kind of pithy, but and Herb usually has a guest. We bring in from AE Works. We'll bring in And I think this week's one of our interior designers. And we'll have conversations about this week's social distancing. So please, if you could join us, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay healthy and stay safe, and we'll see you next time.